Why are you so desperate to get rid of a broken phone? The question cut through the ballroom just as the old flip phone struck the marble floor. It bounced once beside a silver champagne tray, its cracked screen flashing weak blue light. A second later, a voice burst from the tiny speaker, distorted by age and static. "Don't let her sign it." The room froze. Vanessa Hale moved faster than anyone had ever seen her move. Her designer heel scraped across the marble as she lunged for the phone and snapped it shut. The silence that followed felt heavier than the crystal chandeliers hanging above them. 3 hours earlier, Emily Carter stood alone in the service hallway of the Ashford estate, fastening the cuffs of her black uniform. The fabric was worn smooth at the wrists from years of washing. Through the swinging doors she could hear the orchestra warming up, the distant clink of wine glasses, the low laughter of people whose watches cost more than her father's old apartment. Tonight was supposed to be perfect. The engagement celebration of Kieran Ashford and Vanessa Hale. Half the city's elite had been invited. Emily checked her reflection in a stainless steel catering cabinet. 29 years old. Tired eyes. Hair pinned back. A woman who had spent 6 years learning how to disappear in wealthy rooms. Her fingers drifted to the old flip phone inside her apron pocket. The plastic casing was scratched. One corner was held together with clear tape. It had belonged to her father. She carried it everywhere even though it barely worked. Most people thought it was sentimental junk. Maybe it was. Her father had been gone for 3 years. Sometimes the only thing she had left of him was the weight of that phone against her hip. "You still carry that thing?" a voice asked. Emily turned. Vanessa Hale stood in the doorway, elegant, immaculate, dressed in ivory silk that made the room seem dimmer around her. She smiled warmly, the kind of smile magazines loved, the kind that made donors write larger checks. "It was my father's," Emily answered quietly. "Of course." Vanessa stepped closer. "You know, Emily, there's something admirable about people who refuse to let go of the past." Her eyes dipped briefly toward the apron pocket. "Though sometimes old things keep us from understanding our place." The words sounded kind. They landed like stones. Emily lowered her gaze, not because she agreed, because she recognized the weapon hidden inside the sentence. Vanessa squeezed her shoulder gently before walking away. Anyone watching would have called it affection. Emily watched her disappear into the ballroom. A strange chill settled in her stomach. 30 minutes later, she was carrying a tray of champagne through the East Wing when she noticed something unusual. Vanessa wasn't greeting guests. She wasn't speaking with reporters. She stood alone near the private office corridor, speaking urgently into her phone. Emily only caught a fragment while passing by. "No. Not tonight. If he sees it, everything changes." Vanessa immediately turned away when she noticed her. Emily kept walking, kept serving, kept pretending she hadn't heard anything. But the words stayed with her. If he sees it, everything changes. Hours later, as guests filled the ballroom and Kieran Ashford finally arrived, Emily noticed another detail. Not a conversation, not a threat, a look. When Vanessa crossed the room to greet her fiancé, she smiled perfectly. But her right hand remained clenched around a white hospital wristband folded tightly enough to leave marks across her palm. The white hospital wristband stayed in Emily's mind long after Vanessa slipped it back into her clutch. The ballroom glowed with candlelight and polished silver, but something about that strip of plastic felt heavier than all the diamonds in the room. She continued serving champagne, moving from table to table the way she always did, present but unnoticed. That was the strange advantage of her job. Powerful people stopped seeing you after a while. They spoke freely around someone carrying a tray. Near midnight, the orchestra softened into a slow jazz standard. In the service corridor behind the ballroom, industrial dishwashers rumbled like distant thunder. Emily stood beside a stainless steel counter folding damp linen napkins when her old phone vibrated once inside her apron. The battery should have been dead hours ago. Frowning, she pulled it out. A notification blinked across the cracked screen. Voicemail deleted. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't touched the phone. She opened the folder. One message was missing. Not all of them, Just one. The same one that had partially played on the ballroom floor. Someone had deleted it remotely. Emily stared at the screen until footsteps approached. She slipped the phone away. Vanessa appeared carrying 2 untouched champagne flutes. "There you are," she said warmly. "I wanted to apologize if I seemed harsh earlier." Her smile was perfect. "Big nights create stress." Emily said nothing. Vanessa set 1 flute on the counter. "You know, loyalty is a rare quality these days." She glanced toward the apron pocket where the phone rested. "Some people don't appreciate how dangerous misunderstandings can become." The words sounded gentle. The warning beneath them was not. Emily left the drink untouched. Vanessa's smile faded by a fraction before she walked away. 10 minutes later, Emily noticed another detail. A catering receipt sticking halfway out of a trash bin beside the private office corridor. Normally, she would have ignored it. Instead, she picked it up. 2 coffees, purchased at 2:11 a.m. 3 years ago. The receipt paper was faded but still readable. What made her pause was the location. St. Gabriel Medical Center. The same hospital where her father died. The same date printed on the hospital bracelet she had seen in Vanessa's hand. Emily folded the receipt and slipped it into her apron. Coincidence, she told herself. Except she no longer believed in coincidences. Across the ballroom, Kieran Ashford stood speaking with donors. He looked relaxed, unbothered. Yet Emily noticed his gaze drift once toward Vanessa, then toward her, then back again, as if he had quietly started measuring distances between things. Later, when most guests were distracted by speeches, Emily passed the private office corridor again. A security door stood slightly open. On the floor beside it lay a visitor keycard. She recognized the logo immediately. St. Gabriel Medical Center. Her pulse quickened. Before she could pick it up, another hand reached it first. Kieran Ashford bent, lifted the card between 2 fingers, and examined it without expression. "Strange place to find this," he said softly. Emily looked at him. "Yes, sir." He turned the card over. "Especially considering the hospital closed that visitor system almost 3 years ago." Then he slipped the card into his jacket pocket and walked away. 5 minutes later, Emily checked her phone again and realized the deleted voicemail had returned by itself, and its timestamp now read 2:13 a.m., exactly 2 minutes after the coffee receipt from St. Gabriel Medical Center. The timestamp sat on the cracked screen like a splinter Emily could not stop touching. 2:13 a.m. She stood alone in the dim service pantry, surrounded by shelves of folded linens and unopened wine bottles, staring at the old phone while the party continued somewhere beyond the walls. Laughter drifted through the ceiling vents. Crystal glasses clinked. A string quartet played something elegant and expensive. None of it felt real anymore. Her father had died at 2:41 a.m. 3 years ago. She knew because she had memorized every minute of that night. Every call, every bill, every signature. Grief had a way of turning time into stone. The voicemail had been created 28 minutes before his death. Emily opened the audio file again. Static crackled. Then silence. Not empty silence. The kind that carried breathing underneath it. She increased the volume. A faint metallic sound emerged. Click, click, click. Her pulse quickened. She knew that sound. Hospital bed rails. She had heard them for weeks while sitting beside her father's room. Emily replayed it 3 times before slipping the phone into her apron. This was no random recording. Someone had been inside that room. A server pushed through the pantry door carrying empty trays. Emily stepped aside and forced herself back to work. For the next hour, she moved through the ballroom serving wine and collecting abandoned glasses. But her attention sharpened. She began noticing things she would normally ignore. The engagement guests floated from table to table. Politicians, donors, judges, people who never looked directly. The staff. Yet Vanessa kept disappearing. Not for long. 30 seconds. A minute. Then she would return smiling. At 12:17 a.m., Emily watched her emerge from the private office corridor and quickly lock her phone before noticing anyone nearby. At 12:31, She corrected a story she'd told only 10 minutes earlier. The change was small, almost invisible, but Emily caught it. First, Vanessa claimed she'd never visited St. Gabriel Hospital. Later, she mentioned the pediatric wing renovation she'd helped fund. The contradiction lasted less than 5 seconds before the conversation moved on. Nobody else seemed to notice. Across the room, however, Kieran Ashford stopped drinking mid-sentence. He didn't interrupt, didn't react. He simply set his glass down and continued listening. The pressure in the room shifted almost imperceptibly. Around 1 in the morning, Emily found herself replacing linens in a private lounge reserved for family members. A framed photo sat crooked on a side table. She reached to straighten it and froze. The picture showed Vanessa at a charity event from 4 years earlier. Smiling, holding a plaque, standing beside a man Emily recognized instantly. Her father, younger, healthier, wearing his technician badge. Emily stared at the image. Vanessa had known him, not vaguely, not through paperwork. Personally, footsteps sounded behind her. She quickly returned the frame to its place. Vanessa entered the room carrying her clutch. "There you are," she said pleasantly. "I've been looking for you." Her voice was warm. Her eyes were not. She stepped closer and lowered her tone. "Emily, grief can make people see connections that aren't really there." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. She had never mentioned her father. Not tonight. Not to anyone. For one long second, neither woman spoke. Then Vanessa smiled again. "Try to enjoy the evening." She left as quietly as she had arrived. Emily turned back toward the photograph. Her hands trembled slightly now. Not from fear, from certainty. Because beneath the frame, barely visible under the polished wood edge, someone had written a date in silver marker. October 14th. The exact day the voicemail had been recorded. October 14th. Emily stared at the date until the silver marker seemed to burn through the glass. Then the lounge door opened again. This time it wasn't Vanessa. It was Martin Graves, chairman of the Ashford Family Charity Board. 70 years old. Immaculate gray suit. The kind of man who could make a dismissal sound like a compliment. His eyes moved from Emily to the photograph and back again. "Miss Carter," he said pleasantly. "You seem lost." Emily stepped away from the frame. "I was replacing linens, sir." "Of course." He smiled. Reliable as always. The words should have sounded kind. Somehow they felt like being placed back onto a shelf. 10 minutes later, she found herself standing inside a private dining room overlooking the lake. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the city lights. A 12-foot walnut table dominated the room. Vanessa sat at one end beside 2 board members and the charity's legal counsel. Emily immediately understood this meeting had not been scheduled by accident. A single sheet of paper waited at the empty seat nearest the door. "Please sit," Vanessa said warmly. "We're trying to help you." Emily remained standing. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "There appears to be confusion regarding certain memories connected to your late father." His voice was gentle, professional. "Given the emotional circumstances, we'd like to document that any conclusions you've drawn are personal assumptions rather than factual observations." He slid the paper toward her. It wasn't a statement. It was a surrender. A document declaring she possessed no evidence and had no reason to question anyone connected to the charity. Vanessa folded her hands. "Grief is complicated. Nobody blames you." Emily looked down at the paper, then at the expensive fountain pen beside it. Through the windows she could see waitstaff crossing the terrace carrying silver trays beneath strings of warm lights. Somewhere downstairs, guests were laughing. The world continued as if truth were something optional. "I won't sign it," Emily said quietly. Silence settled over the room. Not dramatic. Worse, controlled. The kind of silence wealthy people used when waiting for someone beneath them to realize their mistake. Vanessa sighed softly. "Emily, no one is accusing you of anything. Then why do I need to sign?" The lawyer's smile tightened. "Because misunderstandings can damage reputations." "Whose?" Nobody answered immediately. That was answer enough. Vanessa stood and approached her. You have been part of this household for years. We'd hate to see your future complicated by unnecessary suspicions. Emily noticed something then. Vanessa's perfume. Expensive. Floral. The same scent lingering on the hospital bracelet she had hidden in her pocket after passing the ballroom earlier. Her pulse quickened, but she kept her face still. I won't sign, she repeated. Vanessa's expression remained calm. Only her eyes changed, just for a second. A flicker. A crack. Then it was gone. Very well. The meeting ended. Emily left carrying nothing except the folded receipt, the photograph in her memory, and the certainty that they were afraid of something. As she stepped into the hallway, she nearly collided with Kieran Ashford. He stood motionless outside the door, one hand in his pocket. No expression. No accusation. No rescue. His gaze drifted briefly to the unsigned document still visible on the table behind her. Then to the lawyer. Then to Vanessa. Everything resolved? He asked. Of course, Vanessa answered smoothly. Emily simply misunderstood a few things. Kieran said nothing. He only nodded once. But as Emily walked away, she saw him reach toward the chair she had occupied. There, beside the untouched pen, lay a visitor key card no one had noticed during the meeting. The same St. Gabriel Medical Center card he had already pocketed earlier that night, which meant someone had just placed a second one on the table. The second key card changed the temperature of the night. Not visibly, not dramatically, but Emily saw it happen in the way Kieran Ashford's eyes lingered on the plastic rectangle half a second longer than necessary. Powerful men rarely reacted with surprise. They reacted by becoming quieter. The ballroom had thinned after midnight. Many guests were drifting toward the lake terrace, carrying cocktails beneath strings of golden lights. Inside, staff moved through the aftermath of luxury, collecting crystal glasses, folding abandoned napkins, erasing evidence of excess. Emily was in the service corridor when she made her decision. Her father had always carried a metal lunchbox to work. Not because he needed to, because he distrusted digital storage. Computers forget, he used to say. People erase things. Metal remembers. The lunchbox sat in the back of her apartment closet. She had almost thrown it away a dozen times after his death. Instead, she had brought it to the estate weeks ago after finding it during spring cleaning. It was still hidden in her employee locker. Emily opened it now with trembling fingers. Inside were old receipts, hospital paperwork, expired parking passes, and beneath everything else, a small digital recorder wrapped in a faded blue handkerchief. The recorder looked ancient, scratched plastic, missing battery cover. She pressed the power button. Nothing. Then again. A weak red light blinked once. Alive. Her breath caught. 30 minutes later, she stood in a private office on the second floor. Kieran was there. So was Luca Moretti, his longtime attorney. No bodyguards. No audience. Just silence and expensive furniture. Emily placed the recorder carefully on the desk between them. My father kept this, she said. Luca exchanged a skeptical glance with Kieran. And you never mentioned it? Emily looked down at the recorder. I didn't know there was anything on it. Kieran said nothing. He simply nodded toward the device. Emily pressed play. Static filled the room. Then voices emerged. Faint. Distorted. One male. One female. The recording skipped twice before becoming clear enough to understand. If he finds out about the transfers, then interference, then another fragment. Move the paperwork before morning. Silence followed. Not enough to prove anything. Not enough to accuse anyone. But enough to make the room feel smaller. Luca leaned forward. Can you identify the voices? Emily hesitated. No. It was the truth. She thought she recognized one of them. She refused to pretend certainty. Across the desk, Kieran remained motionless. His gaze drifted toward a hospital bracelet Emily placed beside the recorder. Then to the coffee receipt. Then to the visitor keycards. A pattern was beginning to form. Not a conclusion. Pattern. The office door opened softly. Vanessa entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. She stopped when she saw the recorder. Only for a heartbeat. Then the smile returned. "Working during your engagement party?" she teased gently. Nobody answered. Vanessa set the cups down. "What's this?" Luca explained. She listened carefully, calmly, patiently. "That could be anyone," she said. "Old recordings become distorted. Memories do too. Reasonable, sensible, almost convincing." Then she picked up the hospital bracelet. "Besides, this date is wrong." Kieran finally looked up. "Wrong." Vanessa smiled. October 14th. St. Gabriel admitted patients using blue wristbands back then. Not white ones. The room went silent. Emily felt her stomach drop. Because she had never mentioned where the bracelet came from. Neither had Luca. Neither had Kieran. Yet Vanessa somehow knew exactly which hospital had issued it. Vanessa's smile remained in place for exactly 3 seconds after Kieran asked nothing. Then she excused herself with perfect grace and left the office carrying her coffee cup. The door closed softly behind her. Nobody spoke. Rain tapped against the tall windows overlooking the lake. Somewhere below, the last of the engagement guests were collecting coats and calling drivers. Kieran stared at the hospital bracelet lying beside the recorder. White plastic, black lettering faded by time. Such a small thing. Yet it had just answered a question nobody had asked aloud. Luca was the first to move. She shouldn't have known that. Kieran said nothing. He picked up the bracelet and turned it over in his hand. Then he looked at Emily. "You told anyone where you found this?"
No.
"Anyone?" "No, sir." Silence settled again. Heavy. Deliberate. Kieran set the bracelet down. "Leave the recorder." Emily nodded. She expected questions about money, about lawsuits, about rewards. Instead, Kieran asked, "Why keep all this?" Emily looked at the old recorder wrapped in her father's handkerchief. "Because he died." Being called confused. Her voice stayed steady. "I don't want money. I just want the truth to stop being treated like a mistake." Something flickered across Kieran's face. Not emotion. Recognition. Then it disappeared. An hour later, the mansion had gone quiet. The orchestra was gone. The flowers were beginning to wilt. In a private study lined with dark walnut shelves, Kieran sat alone while Luca spread documents across a desk. Security logs, charity records, hospital visitor reports. The rain continued outside. "Look at this," Luca said. He slid over a file. Kieran opened it. St. Gabriel Medical Center. October 14th. Visitor access records. One entry had been deleted. Not corrupted. Deleted. The timestamp matched 2:13 a.m. exactly. The same minute as the voicemail. Kieran leaned back slowly. Who requested the deletion? Administrative override. Name.
Luca hesitated.
The authorization came through the Ashford Family Foundation. Kieran's eyes lowered to the page. The foundation was controlled by Vanessa. For nearly 5 years he had signed papers she prepared. Approved grants she recommended. Trusted reports she summarized. Another file landed on the desk. This one thicker. Financial transfers connected to the charity. Nothing illegal on the surface. Donations. Endowments. Medical funding. Yet buried between them sat a series of payments routed through shell accounts. Small enough to avoid attention. Consistent enough to matter. The first transfer occurred 2 days after Emily's father died. Kieran reached for a photograph tucked into the folder. It showed a charity event from years earlier. Vanessa smiling beside donors. In the background stood Emily's father wearing a technician badge. Not cut off by accident. Not standing far away. Standing close enough to be part of the conversation. Kieran remembered the event. Barely. He remembered Vanessa introducing everyone in the room. Yet she had claimed not to know the man. A soft vibration interrupted the silence. Luca's phone. He checked the screen. His expression hardened. We pulled the hospital security archive. Kieran looked up. And 7 minutes are missing. Rain struck the glass harder. 7 minutes. Not random footage. Not a damaged file. Exactly 7 minutes removed from the timeline surrounding 2:13 a.m., Kieran stared out at the dark lake beyond the window. For years, he had believed Emily Carter was part of the background of his life. One more employee moving quietly through hallways. One more invisible person carrying trays and cleaning rooms. Yet she had protected evidence for 3 years without asking for $1. While the woman he trusted most had apparently spent the same 3 years erasing pieces of a night she should never have remembered so precisely. And for the first time, Kieran Ashford realized he might have been looking at the wrong person all along. The next morning, the mansion moved with the polished efficiency of a machine that did not know it was being watched. Staff changed linens. Gardeners trimmed hedges along the lake. Assistants carried folders from one office to another. Nothing looked different. That was exactly how Kieran wanted it. By noon, a charity planning meeting had been scheduled in the estate's executive boardroom. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes early, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, the image of a woman who had never made a mistake in her life. A crystal pitcher of water sat untouched in the center of the table. Beside it rested a sealed manila envelope. No label.
No explanation.
Vanessa glanced at it once, then looked away. Kieran entered 2 minutes later. Luca followed. So did 3 board members. Emily was there only because she had been instructed to bring coffee service. Nothing more. Nothing less. She placed porcelain cups in front of each guest and stepped back toward the wall. Invisible again. Or so everyone assumed. The meeting began with routine numbers. Donation forecasts. Expansion plans. Hospital partnerships. Kieran asked questions in the same calm voice he always used.
No accusations.
No tension visible on the surface. Yet Emily noticed something strange. Vanessa kept looking at the sealed envelope. Not often. Just enough. Every few minutes her eyes returned to it, as though she feared what might be inside. 40 minutes passed before Kieran finally touched it. He slid the envelope toward the center of the table. Quick question. Silence settled instantly. Before we approve next quarter's funding. Vanessa smiled. Of course. Kieran folded his hands. Do you remember St. Gabriel Medical Center? The smile remained. Barely. The charity project? Yes. Naturally. Kieran nodded once. Good. Then he said nothing. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Nobody moved. Vanessa finally laughed softly. I'm not sure what you're asking. Nothing yet. Kieran's voice remained calm. Emily watched a board member shift uncomfortably in his chair. Across the room, the small red light of a security camera blinked steadily above the door. Then Kieran opened the envelope. Inside was a visitor log. Just 1 page. Vanessa visibly relaxed. Too quickly. I've seen records like that before, she said. Hospitals archive everything. Do they? Kieran asked. He slid the page toward her. Then perhaps you can explain something. Vanessa looked down. Her eyes scanned the document. What exactly? The handwriting. She frowned. What about it? Kieran leaned back. You tell me. Emily felt the room tighten, because she knew something nobody else there knew. Last night, while helping Luca organize files, she had noticed a tiny detail. The deleted hospital entry and the restored archive entry were written by the same person. Not because of the signature, because of the number 4. Every 4 had an unusual open top. Her father had written numbers the same way. He used to call it an engineer's 4, impossible to miss once seen. Vanessa studied the page too long, then said quietly, It looks normal. Kieran's gaze never left her. Interesting. Another silence. This one heavier. Vanessa set the paper down. Why are we discussing a visitor log from 3 years ago? The question sounded reasonable, logical, professional. Then Emily noticed it. A mistake so small most people would never catch it. Vanessa had just called it a visitor log. Kieran had never said what kind of document was inside the envelope. Across the table, Luca slowly closed his folder. Nobody spoke, not even Kieran. And for the first time since this began, Vanessa looked toward Emily instead of through her. She understood what the room was beginning to understand. The maid was no longer standing alone. Vanessa's eyes found Emily across the boardroom, and for a moment the room became very small. Not because anyone raised their voice. Not because anyone moved. Because the illusion that had protected her for years had finally cracked. The meeting ended 20 minutes later with polite smiles and unfinished coffee.
No acquiescastions. No confrontation.
That was the frightening part. Kieran Ashford dismissed everyone except Luca. Except Emily. Except Vanessa. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, evening settled over the lake. Inside, the boardroom lights reflected against polished walnut and untouched crystal glasses. The red camera light above the door continued blinking, recording everything. Kieran stood near the window with his back to the room. "Close the door," he said. Luca did. Silence followed. Vanessa folded her hands. "Kieran, if this is about some misunderstanding, sit." She sat. The word had not been loud. Somehow it carried more weight than shouting. Emily remained standing near the end of the table. Her old flip phone rested beside the recorder and the hospital bracelet. Small objects. Cheap objects. The kind wealthy people overlooked. Kieran turned around. "Play it." Emily looked at him, then at the recorder. She pressed the button. Static filled the room again. The familiar fragments emerged. Transfer. Paperwork. Morning. Then the recording continued beyond the section anyone had heard before. Emily had spent the afternoon cleaning corrosion from the battery contacts. Long enough for the damaged file to recover additional audio. A male voice. Nervous. Breathing hard. "We shouldn't be doing this." Another voice answered. Female. Calm. Controlled. "Then don't put your name on it." Vanessa's face lost a shade of color. The recording crackled. Papers rustled. A door opened somewhere in the background. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "If Ashford finds out where the foundation money is going, the entire arrangement collapses." Nobody moved. The recorder continued. "And the technician?" the man asked. A pause followed. For long seconds. Then the female voice answered. "He saw the transfer list. I'll handle it." Silence swallowed the room. Even the rain outside seemed to stop. Kieran stared at the recorder as though it had become something alive. Emily felt her pulse pounding in her throat. Vanessa recovered first. "That proves nothing." Her voice sounded thinner now. "You can't even identify the speakers." "No," Emily said quietly. "But I can identify this." She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a photograph she had found in her father's lunchbox that morning. Not the framed charity photo. A different one. Taken from a security monitor. Grainy. Timestamped. October 14th. St. Gabriel Medical Center. 2:11 a.m. Vanessa stood beside Emily's father's hospital room holding a folder. The same folder visible in Foundation archives years later. The same folder tied to the deleted visitor records. Luca opened another document. Then another. Bank transfers. Internal approvals. Administrative overrides. One signature appeared repeatedly.
Vanessa Hale.
The room became so quiet Emily could hear the hum of the air vent above the ceiling. Kieran lowered himself slowly into a chair. He looked older than he had that morning. Not weaker, just wounded in a place no doctor could reach. He picked up one of the transfer authorizations. His own signature sat at the bottom. He remembered signing it, trusting it, never reading beyond the summary she had prepared. Beneath his name sat the approval that moved money into the first Shell account 2 days after Emily's father died. For years he had believed corruption happened somewhere else, under someone else's roof. Then he looked at Emily, the woman everyone had treated like furniture, the woman who had protected evidence longer than anyone else protected the truth. "I told you," Vanessa whispered suddenly, desperation slipping through at last. "I did this for us." Kieran closed the folder. Carefully. Precisely. Then he placed the recorder on top of it. The gesture was small. Final. He looked at Luca. His voice never rose above normal conversation. "Call my attorney." The recorder remained on top of the folder long after nobody needed to hear it anymore. The room stayed silent. Not the silence of uncertainty. The silence that arrives after a truth finally has a name. Vanessa said nothing as Luca stepped into the hallway and began making calls. She sat perfectly still, staring at the polished table where years of carefully constructed reputation had collapsed into a handful of documents, a hospital bracelet, and an old recorder wrapped in a faded blue handkerchief. By sunrise, attorneys had arrived. By noon, the board had convened. By evening, the engagement announcement had vanished from every charity website, donor newsletter, and public profile connected to the foundation. The investigation moved quickly because the evidence did not require interpretation. The deleted hospital records were restored. The transfer approvals were traced. The shell accounts were identified. The foundation froze every account connected to Vanessa's authority. Federal investigators requested copies of the financial files. The board removed her from all leadership positions unanimously. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. Consequences rarely sound dramatic when they are real. They sound like signatures, court filings, canceled access cards, and doors that no longer open. A week later, Emily stood inside the foundation headquarters wearing the same black work shoes she had owned for 3 years. The difference was that nobody looked through her anymore. The board meeting room was full. Donors, attorneys, department directors, hospital representatives, people who once barely knew her name. At the front of the room sat a revised foundation charter. One paragraph had been added: transparency protections, independent audits, whistleblower safeguards, employee reporting rights. Kieran had ordered every policy reviewed from top to bottom. Systems that depended on invisible workers remaining invisible no longer survived the review process. Emily listened quietly as the chairman cleared his throat. There is one more item. A framed photograph was placed on the table. Her father's photograph. The technician badge visible against his shirt. The board voted to formally recognize his role in uncovering the misconduct hidden. Inside the foundation, the resolution passed unanimously. For a moment Emily could not speak. Not because she wanted praise. Because for 3 years official records had treated him like an inconvenience. Confused man. A footnote. Now his name was finally written correctly. 2 months later, St. Gabriel Medical Center announced a new scholarship program for audio engineering and medical technology students. The scholarship carried her father's name. The hospital bills left behind after his death were erased through a restitution fund created from recovered assets. The small apartment where Emily's mother lived received accessibility renovations that should have been approved years earlier. Legal assistance protected the family from every outstanding claim connected to the old medical debt. Nobody handed Emily a suitcase full of money. Something more important happened. The ground stopped moving beneath her feet. Late one evening, after the lawyers, meetings, interviews, and paperwork were finally over, Emily returned to the foundation building. Most of the lights were off. Rain tapped softly against the windows. In a glass display case near the entrance sat a few items from the foundation's history. Awards, photographs, donor plaques, and now, resting on a dark velvet stand, sat the old flip phone. The same cracked phone people had called garbage. The same phone Vanessa had thrown to the floor. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "Evidence preserved by Emily Carter. Truth survives when someone refuses to let it disappear." Emily stared at it for a long moment. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Kieran stopped beside the display case. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, he looked at the phone. "I almost threw away the wrong person." Emily smiled faintly. "You weren't the only one." Outside, the rain continued. Inside, the old phone remained exactly where it belonged now. Not hidden in an apron pocket, not treated like trash, but preserved as proof that power had lost, truth had endured, and the woman everyone once overlooked had finally been heard.